Sweetie, economy boarding is at the other gate. This line is for first-class passengers only.
The words cut through the humid Miami air with surgical precision delivered by a woman who had perfected the art of polite dismissal. Victoria Ashford didn't even look up from her tablet as she spoke, her manicured fingers sliding across the screen with the same casual authority she used to redirect what she perceived as misplaced passengers. But before we dive into this story that will change everything you think you know about power and perception, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that respect should never depend on appearances, hit that subscribe button because what you're about to witness will restore your faith in justice. Now, let me take you back to Gate B12 at Miami International Airport, where the most expensive lesson in corporate hierarchy was about to unfold. The Celestial Airways first-class lounge buzzed with the refined energy of exclusivity. Crystal glasses clinked softly against marble countertops while the scent of fresh orchids mixed with the subtle leather aroma from designer luggage. This wasn't just a boarding area, it was a sanctuary for society's elite, and Victoria Ashford was its high priestess. At 42, Victoria commanded attention effortlessly. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The navy Chanel blazer hugged her tall frame perfectly, while her pearl necklace caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. But it was her eyes, sharp, calculating, and utterly confident, that truly announced her authority. She wasn't just Senior Vice President of Passenger Experience for Celestial Airways. She was the living embodiment of the airline's premium brand promise. Victoria had built her reputation on a simple philosophy excellence through exclusion. Her TED Talk luxury as earned not given had been viewed over 2 million times. Forbes had featured her in their Women Who Set Standards profile. She was scheduled to keynote next month's International Aviation Leadership Summit with a presentation titled Maintaining Excellence in an Era of Entitlement. Her staff moved around her with practiced deference. Each gesture, each interaction was choreographed to maintain what Victoria called the elevation experience. She had personally trained every gate agent in what she termed intelligent passenger assessment, the ability to instantly recognize who belonged in premium spaces and who didn't. The boarding area itself reflected Victoria's exacting standards. Plush leather seating arranged in intimate conversation clusters. A dedicated concierge desk staffed by multilingual agents. A private bar serving top-shelf spirits and artisanal coffee. Even the floor gleamed Italian marble polished to mirror perfection. This was Victoria's kingdom, and she ruled it with benevolent authority. Standing 20 feet away, Marcus Thompson looked like he had wandered in from a different world entirely. At 24, he possessed the casual confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, regardless of the setting. His dark brown skin glowed with the healthy sheen of someone who spent time outdoors. He wore a simple gray hoodie, well-fitted jeans, and pristine white sneakers. A worn leather backpack hung from one shoulder while expensive-looking headphones rested around his neck, the only hint that his financial situation might be more complex than his appearance suggested. Marcus's eyes held an interesting contradiction. They were kind, patient, but carried the weight of experience far beyond his years. When he smiled, which was often, it reached those eyes completely. But when he listened, really listened, there was a stillness about him that suggested depths most people his age hadn't yet discovered. He moved through the world with the unhurried pace of someone who had learned that rushing rarely improved outcomes. His voice, when he spoke, carried the subtle authority of education and confidence, but he wielded it gently. Most people meeting Marcus for the first time found themselves liking him immediately, though they couldn't quite articulate why. The contrast between Marcus and the typical Celestial Airways first-class passenger was stark. Where others wore their wealth like armor, Marcus seemed utterly unconcerned with projecting status. Where others demanded attention, Marcus appeared content to observe. It was precisely this difference that would soon trigger a chain of events neither he nor Victoria could have anticipated. Elena Vasquez moved nervously behind the check-in counter, her dark eyes darting between her computer screen and Victoria's commanding presence. At 28, Elena was still new enough to feel intimidated by Victoria's reputation, but experienced enough to recognize quality customer service. She had worked in hospitality for 6 years, starting as a hotel front desk clerk, and working her way up to this prestigious position with Celestial Airways. Elena possessed a natural warmth that passengers immediately trusted. Her smile was genuine, her English flawless despite the slight accent that hinted at her Colombian heritage. She had chosen this career because she genuinely enjoyed helping people, and she took pride in making travel experiences memorable for the right reasons. But working under Victoria Ashford had proven challenging. Elena admired Victoria's expertise and attention to detail, but she sometimes felt uncomfortable with Victoria's rigid passenger profiling. During training, Victoria had emphasized the importance of maintaining standards, but Elena often wondered whether those standards sometimes crossed ethical lines. Today felt different somehow. Elena had noticed Victoria seemed more on edge than usual, constantly checking her phone and adjusting her jewelry small tells that suggested underlying stress despite Victoria's composed exterior. A major industry publication was scheduled to photograph Victoria later that week for a cover story about innovative leadership in aviation. The pressure to maintain her flawless reputation was clearly weighing on her. Captain James Rodriguez was completing his pre-flight checklist when he noticed the unusual delay in boarding. Through the cockpit window, he could see a small crowd gathering near the gate phones raised in the universal gesture of social media documentation. After 20 years of flying, James had developed an instinct for passenger complications that could escalate quickly. James was the kind of pilot passengers trusted instinctively. His graying temples and calm demeanor suggested competence earned through thousands of safe flights. He had worked his way up from regional carriers to international routes, earning respect through reliability rather than politics. His crew considered him fair, but demanding exactly what you wanted in someone responsible for your life at 30,000 feet. What James couldn't see from his vantage point was that the passenger complication developing at Gate B12 would soon force him to make the most difficult decision of his career. Sarah Coleman had positioned herself perfectly to capture whatever was about to unfold. As a travel influencer with over 800,000 followers, she had developed an eye for content that resonated with audiences. The tension building around the first-class check-in counter felt like the opening scenes of a story worth telling. Sarah's phone was already live streaming to her Instagram audience when Marcus Thompson approached Victoria Ashford's position. She didn't know either of their names yet, but her instincts told her this interaction was about to become something significant. The stage was set. The players were in position. And none of them, except perhaps Marcus, understood that they were about to participate in a master class about the difference between assumed authority and actual power. As Flight 847's scheduled departure time approached, Victoria glanced at her platinum Cartier watch and straightened her blazer. She had a reputation for running the most punctual premium boarding process in the industry. Today would be no exception. At least that's what she thought. Marcus approached the priority boarding counter with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. His movements were deliberate, but relaxed, carrying the natural confidence that comes from being genuinely comfortable in one's own skin. He held his boarding pass casually in his left hand, while his right adjusted the strap of his backpack, a gesture so ordinary that most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Victoria Ashford noticed everything. Her trained eye immediately cataloged what she saw college-aged black male casual attire suggesting limited financial means overall presentation inconsistent with Celestial Airways' first-class passenger profile. Before Marcus could speak, Victoria's mental algorithm had already processed and categorized him. Sweetie, economy boarding is at the other gate. Victoria repeated this time, looking up from her tablet with a smile that was professionally warm but unmistakably dismissive. This line is for first-class passengers only. Gate C7 will start boarding coach passengers in about 15 minutes. Marcus stopped directly in front of her counter, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her tablet. He didn't. Instead, he stood with perfect posture, hands relaxed at his sides and made direct eye contact. "I understand," he said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone choosing his words carefully. "This is where I need to be." The response wasn't what Victoria expected. Most misdirected passengers responded with either embarrassed apologies or defensive explanations. Marcus had done neither. He had simply stated a fact with the kind of quiet confidence that Victoria associated with her most valued customers, except everything about his appearance suggested he couldn't afford to be one of them. Elena watched the exchange from her position behind the auxiliary counter, her instincts already prickling with concern. She had seen this dynamic before, passengers who didn't fit Victoria's visual expectations facing additional scrutiny. Usually it resolved quickly when the passenger produced appropriate credentials or acknowledged the misunderstanding. But something about Marcus's calm certainty suggested this interaction might unfold differently. Sir Victoria continued her voice, maintaining its professional courtesy, while her body language shifted subtly into a more defensive posture. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass and identification to verify your seat assignment." This was not standard procedure. Passengers approaching the priority boarding counter were generally assumed to belong there until proven otherwise. But Victoria had learned to trust her instincts about passenger profiling, and every instinct told her this young man was either confused about his gait or attempting some form of fraud. Marcus reached into his hoodie's front pocket and retrieved a boarding pass along with a driver's license. He placed both items on the marble counter with the same unhurried precision he had exhibited since approaching. No fumbling, no nervous energy, no rush to prove himself. Victoria picked up the documents with 2 fingers, a gesture so subtle that most observers wouldn't have recognized it as expressing distaste. But Elena noticed, Sarah Coleman noticed, and Marcus definitely noticed. The boarding pass was legitimate, that much was immediately obvious. The paper quality, the printing, the magnetic strip all indicated official Celestial Airways documentation. But the seat assignment made Victoria's eyebrows raise involuntarily. Passenger Marcus Thompson, Seat 1A, Class First, Status Priority VIP. Seat 1A was Celestial Airways' most exclusive accommodation. It was larger than most hotel rooms, featured a private entrance, and came with dedicated concierge service throughout the flight. The ticket price exceeded $25,000, and the waiting list for last-minute availability typically ran 6 months deep. Victoria read the information twice, then looked up at Marcus with barely concealed skepticism. "Mr. Thompson," she said, placing subtle emphasis on the formal address, while her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of its accuracy. "There seems to be some confusion with your documentation." "Is there?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying just enough curiosity to sound genuinely interested in her assessment. He didn't lean forward aggressively or demand explanations. He simply waited with the patient attention of someone accustomed to letting others reveal their assumptions. Victoria's extensive experience in luxury customer service had taught her to handle delicate situations with diplomatic precision. When dealing with potential fraud, the key was to provide face-saving alternatives while maintaining security protocols. But Marcus's calm confidence was disrupting her usual script. "Our computer systems have been experiencing some technical difficulties today," Victoria explained, her fingers dancing across her tablet with practiced efficiency. "I'm seeing some conflicting information in your reservation. Could you help me understand how you acquired this particular ticket?" It was a masterfully constructed question. If Marcus had legitimately purchased the ticket, he would provide a straightforward answer about booking through the airline's website or a travel agent. If he was attempting fraud, the question would typically prompt nervous explanations or defensive responses that would reveal the deception. Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering her question with the same patient attention he might give to solving a crossword puzzle. "I called the customer service line and requested it," he said simply. Again, not the response Victoria expected. No elaborate story about winning a contest or receiving the ticket as a gift. No defensive explanations about his financial capacity, just a straightforward answer that somehow felt both completely truthful and utterly insufficient. Elena found herself leaning forward, slightly straining to hear the conversation while trying to appear focused on her own computer screen. Something about the interaction felt wrong to her, though she couldn't articulate exactly what was triggering her concern. "Sir, I hope you understand that our premium cabin tickets require additional verification." Victoria continued her smile, growing more strained with each exchange. "The customer service representative should have informed you about our enhanced security protocols for high-value reservations." This was improvisation on Victoria's part. No such protocols existed, but Marcus's responses were forcing her into increasingly creative explanations for her skepticism. Marcus nodded thoughtfully as if Victoria's explanation made perfect sense. "They did mention something about special procedures," he said agreeably. "What kind of verification do you need?" The question was so accommodating that it momentarily threw Victoria off balance. Most passengers facing unexpected scrutiny responded with frustration or demands to speak with supervisors. Marcus seemed genuinely interested in cooperating with whatever process Victoria deemed necessary. David Mitchell had been observing the interaction from his position near the departure board. As gate agent supervisor, David had developed keen instincts for situations that might escalate into passenger complaints or social media incidents. The body language at Victoria's counter was setting off his internal alarm systems. David was a cautious man by nature. At 38, he had survived 3 airline mergers and 2 major industry downturns by staying alert to political undercurrents and avoiding unnecessary conflicts. He respected Victoria's expertise, but he also knew that passenger disputes could be career-threatening if handled poorly. "Is everything all right over there?" David asked, approaching Victoria's counter with the careful neutrality of someone trying to assess a situation without taking sides. Victoria looked up with visible relief at having a colleague's support. "Just working through some verification issues with Mr. Thompson's reservation," she explained, her tone suggesting professional competence rather than personal suspicion. "Our systems are showing some irregularities that need to be resolved before boarding." David glanced at Marcus, who smiled pleasantly and extended his hand. "Marcus Thompson," he said, offering a handshake with the natural confidence of someone accustomed to introductions. "Nice to meet you." David shook Marcus's hand immediately, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. Whatever he had expected from someone causing verification issues, Marcus Thompson didn't fit the profile. David Mitchell, gate supervisor David, replied automatically, "Sorry for any inconvenience. These computer glitches have been problematic all week." Marcus nodded understanding. "Technology can be frustrating. Take your time." The interaction lasted less than 30 seconds, but it provided David with crucial information. Marcus spoke with clear diction, displayed confident body language, and demonstrated the kind of social skills typically associated with frequent business travelers. David's instincts suggested this wasn't a passenger trying to deceive anyone, but Victoria was clearly convinced otherwise, and challenging her judgment in front of passengers would create its own set of problems. Sarah Coleman had been live-streaming the interaction for the past 5 minutes, providing running commentary for her followers while trying to remain unobtrusive. Her phone was positioned to capture both Victoria and Marcus in frame, and her audience was growing rapidly as viewers shared the stream. "We're watching what appears to be a passenger verification issue," Sarah whispered into her phone, "and honestly, this feels like it might be heading somewhere important. The passenger is being incredibly polite, but the airline representative seems convinced there's a problem." The comments section of Sarah's stream was already filling with viewer reactions. Many expressed frustration with airline customer service experiences. Others speculated about what might be driving the apparent conflict. A few astute observers noted the stark contrast between Marcus's calm demeanor and Victoria's increasingly defensive posture. What none of Sarah's viewers could have anticipated was that they were witnessing the opening moments of a story that would fundamentally change how the aviation industry approached customer service. Robert Hayes had been reading his Wall Street Journal near Gate B11 when the commotion caught his attention. As a member of Celestial Airways' board of directors, Robert maintained a keen interest in passenger experience issues, though he rarely intervened directly in operational matters. But something about the young black man standing calmly at Victoria's counter triggered a nagging sense of familiarity. Robert couldn't place where he might have seen him before, but the feeling was strong enough to warrant closer observation. Robert folded his newspaper and moved to a seat with a better view of the boarding counter. He had learned over 30 years in business that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the most unexpected places. Victoria was beginning to feel the weight of multiple eyes on her interaction with Marcus. What should have been a routine passenger verification was becoming a public performance with at least one person actively filming and several others clearly eavesdropping. Mr. Thompson, Victoria said, raising her voice slightly to project authority. I'm going to need you to step aside while we verify your reservation through additional channels. This process may take several minutes, and I don't want to hold up other passengers. It was a reasonable-sounding request that accomplished two objectives. It removed Marcus from the immediate boarding process while suggesting to observers that the delay was procedural rather than discriminatory. Marcus looked around the boarding area, noting the small crowd that had gathered, and the phones pointed in his direction. When he turned back to Victoria, his expression was thoughtful rather than frustrated. Are you certain about your company's policies regarding passenger verification? He asked quietly. The question was delivered with such gentle curiosity that it took Victoria several seconds to recognize it as a challenge. Victoria's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly at Marcus's question. In her 15 years with Celestial Airways, she had developed an acute sensitivity to passenger challenges to her authority. What made this instance particularly irritating was Marcus's tone. He wasn't angry or demanding, which would have justified a firm response. Instead, his gentle inquiry felt somehow more threatening to her professional standing. Sir Victoria replied, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to having the final word. I am the Senior Vice President of Passenger Experience for this airline. I am absolutely certain about our policies. She emphasized her title deliberately, a verbal reminder of the hierarchical distance between them. In Victoria's experience, most passengers who understood her level of authority quickly adjusted their approach to become more deferential. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if her credentials were genuinely impressive, rather than tools being wielded against him. That's quite a responsibility, he said, his tone carrying no trace of sarcasm. You must see a lot of different situations in that role. The response was so unexpected that Victoria momentarily lost her conversational rhythm. She had prepared for argument defensiveness or capitulation. Thoughtful engagement wasn't in her script for dealing with problem passengers. Elena watched the exchange with growing unease. She had worked customer service long enough to recognize when interactions were heading toward escalation, but this conversation felt different. Victoria was clearly establishing dominance, but Marcus wasn't responding with the typical patterns of submission or resistance. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding her perspective, which somehow made Victoria's aggressive positioning appear less justified. Yes, while Victoria continued regaining her professional composure. Part of maintaining service excellence requires careful attention to security protocols. I'm sure you understand the importance of verification in today's travel environment. Marcus tilted his head slightly. What specific protocols concern you about my reservation? The question was perfectly reasonable, but it forced Victoria to articulate suspicions she preferred to keep implicit. Saying that Marcus didn't look like he belonged in first class would sound discriminatory. Claiming his documentation appeared fraudulent would require evidence she didn't possess. Our system flagged your reservation for additional review, Victoria said, choosing language that suggested computer-generated concerns rather than personal judgment. This happens occasionally with last-minute bookings or unusual payment methods, I see, Marcus replied. What would help resolve the system's concerns? Again, he was being completely cooperative, while somehow making Victoria's explanations sound less convincing with each exchange. Elena found herself impressed by Marcus's ability to remain patient, under increasingly obvious scrutiny. David Mitchell had positioned himself close enough to monitor the conversation while maintaining the pretense of reviewing departure schedules on his tablet. His experience with passenger conflicts suggested this situation was approaching a critical decision point. Either Victoria would find a graceful way to allow Marcus to board, or she would escalate to security intervention. Mr. Thompson, Victoria said, her voice taking on the tone she typically reserved for explaining policies to unreasonable passengers. I'm going to need to make some phone calls to verify your reservation details. This process will take time, and I cannot allow boarding to proceed until it's complete. She reached for her desk phone with deliberate authority, a gesture designed to demonstrate her control over the situation. Marcus watched her movement with the same calm attention he had displayed throughout their interaction. "Before you make those calls," he said quietly, "I'd recommend you reconsider your approach." The words were spoken without aggression or threat, but they carried a weight that made Victoria pause with her hand halfway to the phone. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine surprise. "I'm simply suggesting," Marcus continued, "that you might want to think carefully about how you want this situation to be remembered." Elena felt her heart rate increase. Something in Marcus's tone had shifted not toward anger or frustration, but toward a kind of certainty that suggested he knew something the rest of them didn't. Sarah Coleman's stream was now being watched by over 2,000 viewers, many of whom were sharing clips on other platforms. The comments were becoming increasingly critical of what appeared to be discriminatory treatment based on appearance. "This is wild," Sarah whispered to her phone. "The passenger is being incredibly reasonable, but the airline representative seems determined to treat him like a security threat." What Sarah couldn't see was Robert Hayes pulling out his phone to make a quiet call. His sense of familiarity about Marcus had crystallized into recognition, and he was beginning to understand that Victoria was making a career-defining mistake. Victoria straightened to her full height, using her physical presence to reinforce her positional authority. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice now carrying unmistakable firmness, "I'm going to ask you one final time to step aside so that legitimate passengers can board this aircraft. If you refuse to cooperate, I will be forced to call security." The threat was delivered with the confidence of someone who had never had their authority seriously challenged. Victoria was essentially daring Marcus to force a confrontation she was certain she would win. Marcus looked around the boarding area, taking in the cameras, the gathering crowd, and the various airline employees who were now openly watching their interaction. When his gaze returned to Victoria, there was something in his expression that made Elena take an involuntary step forward. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new quality that made everyone within earshot pay closer attention, "I think you should make those phone calls now." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a request. It was the tone of someone who knew exactly what those phone calls would reveal. Victoria felt a chill of uncertainty for the first time since the interaction began. Something about Marcus's confidence was beginning to feel less like misplaced arrogance and more like justified assurance. But she had committed herself too publicly to back down now. "Security to Gate B12." Victoria announced into her headset, her voice carrying across the boarding area. "We need assistance with a passenger verification issue." The announcement sent a ripple of murmurs through the assembled crowd. Phones were raised higher, recording angles adjusted, and social media notifications began pinging across multiple platforms. Marcus remained perfectly still throughout Victoria's security call, showing no signs of concern about the approaching confrontation. If anything, he seemed to relax slightly, as if the escalation was exactly what he had been expecting. Elena couldn't remain silent any longer. "Victoria," she said, stepping forward with obvious reluctance, "maybe we should try scanning his boarding pass first. If there's a system error, it might resolve itself." Victoria turned toward Elena with barely controlled irritation. "Elena, please focus on your assigned duties. This situation requires judgment that comes with experience." The dismissal was sharp enough that Elena flushed with embarrassment, but it also crystallized something for the watching crowd. Elena's suggestion had been reasonable, professional, and focused on customer service. Victoria's rejection of it appeared arbitrary and personal. David Mitchell made a decision that would later prove either career-saving or career-ending. "Victoria," he said, moving closer to the counter, "let's just run a quick verification scan before security arrives. It might save everyone some time." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger at having her judgment questioned by a subordinate, but David's suggestion had been made publicly enough that refusing it would appear unreasonable. "Fine," Victoria said curtly. She picked up Marcus's boarding pass and held it over the scanner with exaggerated reluctance. The system beep was crisp and immediate. The screen flashed green, and the words that appeared made Victoria's face go pale. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson. Priority VIP verified. Please proceed to your seat." But there was more information on the screen details that made Victoria's blood pressure spike and David's eyes widen with sudden understanding. The reservation showed not just first-class seating but executive override privileges, which meant the passenger had authority to make operational decisions if necessary. More importantly, the booking reference number contained prefixes that David recognized as internal corporate codes, typically reserved for board members or major shareholders. Victoria stared at the screen reading and rereading information that didn't align with any of her assumptions about Marcus Thompson. "Is there still a problem?" Marcus asked gently. His question cut through the sudden silence at the boarding counter like a blade. The boarding area had fallen into an unnatural quiet as passengers sensed that something significant was unfolding. Victoria stood frozen behind her counter, staring at the scanner display that contradicted everything her instincts had told her about Marcus Thompson. The green light pulsed steadily, each flash a small rebuke to her professional judgment. Elena leaned forward slightly to glimpse the screen, her customer service training overriding her reluctance to further challenge Victoria's authority. What she saw made her stomach drop. Elena whispered low enough that nearby passengers couldn't overhear his reservation show's executive override status. "That's board-level authorization." Victoria's jaw tightened. She had built her reputation on reading passengers correctly, on maintaining standards that preserved Celestial Airways' exclusive brand identity. To acknowledge that she had misread Marcus, this completely would undermine everything she had worked to establish. "Systems can be hacked," Victoria said, her voice carrying just enough authority to sound confident while her eyes betrayed growing uncertainty. "Sophisticated fraud operations have access to legitimate-looking documentation." Marcus watched Victoria's face cycle through surprised confusion and mounting defensiveness. He had seen this pattern before, people so committed to their initial judgments that contrary evidence became a personal attack rather than useful information. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same gentle certainty that had characterized their entire interaction. "You might want to call your supervisor before this goes any further." The suggestion was delivered without aggression, but its implications were unmistakable. Marcus was giving Victoria an opportunity to seek guidance before making a mistake that couldn't be undone. David Mitchell felt sweat forming on his forehead as he processed what was happening. Executive override status wasn't something that could be faked. It required authentication protocols that came directly from corporate headquarters. If Marcus Thompson legitimately held that authorization, then Victoria was treating a VIP customer as a security threat in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. "Mr. Thompson," David said, stepping forward with the diplomatic caution of someone trying to defuse a bomb, "I apologize for any inconvenience. Let me personally escort you to the aircraft so we can." David. Victoria's voice cut across his words with sharp authority. "This passenger will not board my aircraft until we receive independent verification of his identity and reservation status." The phrase "my aircraft" hung in the air with particular weight. Victoria was asserting ownership over a flight that technically belonged to Celestial Airways, but more practically belonged to whoever held the authority to make operational decisions. Sarah Coleman's live-stream audience had grown to over 5,000 viewers, with comments pouring in from people sharing their own experiences with airline discrimination. Several viewers had begun screen recording the stream to preserve evidence of what they were witnessing. "This is getting intense," Sarah whispered to her phone. The airline representative is literally refusing to accept what appears to be legitimate documentation. I've never seen anything like this. What Sarah couldn't see was Robert Hayes ending his phone call with a grim expression. His conversation with the Celestial Airways chief executive officer had confirmed his growing suspicions about Marcus Thompson's identity. More troubling, the CEO had been unaware that any passenger verification issues were occurring at Gate B12. "Get someone down there immediately," Robert heard through his phone speaker before the CEO hung up. Marcus pulled out his own phone with the unhurried precision that had characterized all his movements throughout this encounter. He scrolled through his contacts with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who he needed to reach. "Elena," he said, looking directly at the young flight attendant who had tried to moderate the situation, "could you give me a moment of privacy to make a phone call?" The request was so polite that Elena nodded automatically before realizing she had no obligation to accommodate him. Sir Victoria interjected. "You cannot make phone calls in this secure area without supervision." This was another improvised policy designed to maintain her control over the situation. Marcus looked at Victoria with what appeared to be genuine sadness. "Ma'am, that's not an actual regulation." The correction was delivered so gently that it took several seconds for its impact to register. Victoria had been caught imposing non-existent rules, and everyone within earshot had heard it. Elena felt her face flush with second-hand embarrassment. Marcus's knowledge of airport regulations suggested a familiarity with air travel that contradicted Victoria's assessment of him as inexperienced or fraudulent. "I'm calling security immediately," Victoria announced, reaching for her desk phone with movements sharp enough to suggest barely controlled anger. "This passenger is being disruptive and non-compliant with reasonable requests." Marcus watched Victoria dial his expression thoughtful rather than concerned. "Before you complete that call," he said quietly, "I want to be clear about something." Victoria paused, her finger hovering over the final digit. "I came here today hoping for a simple, quiet flight to London," Marcus continued. "I dressed casually because I value comfort over appearance. I approached your counter with legitimate documentation and a confirmed reservation. I have been polite, cooperative, and patient throughout this entire interaction." His voice remained calm, but there was something in his tone that made even the most distant passengers strain to hear. "You have questioned my integrity, implied that I'm a criminal, threatened me with arrest, and created a public spectacle based entirely on how I look." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she held the phone. "I want you to think very carefully," Marcus continued, "about whether continuing down this path serves your interests or your airline's interests." Elena found herself holding her breath. She had witnessed hundreds of passenger disputes, but none had carried this kind of weight. Marcus wasn't threatening Victoria, he was warning her. "Are you threatening me?" Victoria asked, her voice rising enough that passengers throughout the boarding area could hear clearly. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. I'm offering you one final opportunity to reconsider your choices." David Mitchell made another decision that would prove crucial to his future with the airline. "Victoria," he said, stepping directly between her and Marcus, "I think we should contact corporate before proceeding further." Victoria's eyes blazed with fury at being publicly contradicted by a subordinate. "David, if you interfere with security protocols one more time, you'll be looking for new employment." The threat was delivered loudly enough that several passengers pulled out their phones to record what appeared to be escalating workplace drama. Marcus looked at David with what appeared to be appreciation for his courage in an impossible situation. "Thank you for trying," Marcus said to David. Then he turned back to Victoria. "Ma'am, I'm going to make my phone call now. What happens next depends entirely on how you choose to respond." He stepped aside just far enough to create some privacy while remaining visible to the crowd and cameras. Victoria completed her security call with shaking hands. "This is Gate B12, she said into the phone. "I need immediate assistance with a passenger who is refusing to comply with verification procedures and making threatening statements." The description bore little resemblance to what observers had actually witnessed, but Victoria had committed herself to a narrative that required Marcus to be the aggressor. Marcus dialed a number and waited for the connection. "It's me," he said quietly into his phone. "We have a situation at Gate B12 in Miami." His tone was businesslike but calm, the voice of someone reporting a problem rather than someone asking for help. "Yes," Marcus continued. "I need you to initiate Protocol 7. Elena had never heard of Protocol 7, but something about the way Marcus said it made her think it wasn't good news for Victoria. "Understood," Marcus said. "Thank you." He ended the call and returned his attention to the crowd that had gathered around Victoria's counter. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, raising his voice just enough to address everyone in the immediate area. "I apologize for the delay this has caused your travel plans. The situation should be resolved shortly." The announcement was so calm and authoritative that several passengers automatically said thank you in response. Victoria stared at Marcus with growing alarm. Nothing about his behavior suggested someone who was worried about the approaching security confrontation. If anything, he seemed to be preparing for something else entirely. Airport security arrived at Gate B12 within 3 minutes of Victoria's call, but by then Marcus Thompson had set in motion a chain of events that would reshape more than just this single flight. Victoria stood beside the 2 security officers explaining her concerns about passenger verification and potential documentation fraud. She gestured toward Marcus with the confidence of someone who believed the authorities would validate her professional judgment. Marcus waited patiently for Victoria to complete her explanation, then approached the security officers with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. "Officers," he said, extending his hand to each in turn. "I understand Mrs. Ashford has some concerns about my travel documents. I'm happy to cooperate with any verification process you deem necessary." The lead security officer, a veteran named Tom Rodriguez, immediately noticed the contrast between Victoria's agitated description and Marcus's calm demeanor. In his experience, passengers attempting fraud typically displayed obvious nervous behavior when confronted with authority. "Sir, can you show me your identification and boarding pass?" Officer Rodriguez asked. Marcus handed over his documents without hesitation. Rodriguez examined the paperwork with practiced efficiency, then looked up at Marcus with an expression that mixed confusion with growing concern. "Mr. Thompson, these documents appear to be completely legitimate. Could you help me understand what prompted this security call?" Marcus glanced toward Victoria, who was standing with her arms crossed and her jaw set in stubborn determination. "I believe Miss Ashford felt my appearance was inconsistent with her expectations for first-class passengers," Marcus said simply. The words hit the boarding area like a physical blow. Officer Rodriguez looked from Marcus to Victoria and back again, the implications of what he was hearing beginning to register. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said to Victoria, "are you telling me this security call was based on appearance rather than actual security concerns?" Victoria's face flushed red as she realized how her actions would sound when described honestly. "This passenger has been uncooperative and disruptive," she said, her voice rising defensively. "He has made threatening statements and refused to follow reasonable verification procedures." Elena couldn't remain silent any longer. "That's not what happened," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "Mr. Thompson has been polite and cooperative throughout this entire interaction." Victoria whirled toward Elena with fury. "Elena, you are terminated, effective immediately." The firing was delivered so impulsively that it shocked everyone within earshot. Marcus looked at Elena with genuine regret. "Ma'am," he said to Victoria, "that young woman was doing her job correctly. You might want to reconsider that decision." Victoria faced Marcus with the desperate determination of someone who had committed to a course of action and couldn't find a way to retreat. "Security," she said to Officer Rodriguez. "I want this passenger removed from the airport immediately. He is banned from flying Celestial Airways." The demand hung in the air as phones captured every word and live streams carried the moment to thousands of viewers. Marcus looked at Victoria with an expression that mixed sadness with resignation. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you've just made the worst mistake of your career. and with those words everything changed. Marcus Thompson stood calmly amid the growing chaos at Gate B12, his phone in his hand and an expression of patient determination on his face. What Victoria Ashford didn't realize was that the quiet young man she had dismissed and humiliated was about to demonstrate the difference between assumed authority and actual power. Elena Marcus said. Turning to the flight attendant, who had just lost her job for defending him, "I want you to know that your integrity in this situation will not be forgotten." Elena, still reeling from Victoria's impulsive termination, looked at Marcus with confusion and gratitude. She had expected to leave the airport in disgrace, but something in Marcus's tone suggested her story wasn't over. Marcus dialed another number, this one with the practiced ease of someone accessing frequently called contacts. As the phone rang, he moved slightly away from the immediate crowd, but remained visible to the cameras and witnesses who were documenting everything. Sarah Marcus said into his phone, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to making important calls. "This is Marcus. I need immediate implementation of Operational Protocol 7 at Miami International Gate B12. The name Sarah caused Robert Hayes to look up sharply from his position near the departure board. In his capacity as a Celestial Airways board member, Robert knew that Sarah Mitchell was the airline's chief operating officer, not the kind of person that random passengers would have on speed dial. "Yes," Marcus continued. "We have a passenger discrimination incident involving senior staff. Victoria Ashford from Passenger Experience is the primary issue." Victoria's eyes widened as she heard her name mentioned in what sounded increasingly like a corporate conversation rather than a plea for help from a frustrated passenger. "I'll need immediate review of all related personnel," Marcus said, his tone remaining calm but taking on unmistakable executive authority. "This includes reviewing Elena Vasquez's termination. She attempted to de-escalate and was fired for protecting passenger rights." Elena felt her heart rate increase as she realized Marcus was somehow advocating for her job restoration in what appeared to be a call to airline management. Officer Rodriguez moved closer to Marcus, his security instincts telling him that this conversation was more significant than a typical passenger complaint. "Timeline for resolution," Marcus asked into his phone. "Understood. Initiate immediately." Marcus ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This time, his voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone giving orders rather than making requests. "James, this is Marcus Thompson. I need you to ground Flight 847 immediately and return to the gate." David Mitchell felt his blood pressure spike. James Rodriguez was the captain of their flight, and the only person who could authorize what Marcus had just requested was someone with extraordinary authority within the airline. "No, not a medical emergency," Marcus continued. "Operational directive. We have a critical personnel issue that needs immediate resolution before departure." Victoria watched Marcus with growing alarm. The casual confidence with which he was making these calls suggested connections that extended far beyond what his appearance had indicated. "Understood, Captain Rodriguez," Marcus said. "Thank you." As Marcus ended his second call, Sarah Coleman's livestream experienced a surge of new viewers as clips from her coverage began spreading across social media platforms. The comment section was exploding with speculation about Marcus's identity and the obvious disparity between how he was being treated and how he was responding. "This is absolutely insane," Sarah whispered to her phone. "This passenger is making calls that sound like he's giving orders to airline management. The captain is apparently responding, and the gate agent who defended him just got fired by the woman who started all this." Victoria approached Marcus with desperation beginning to overtake her anger. "Who exactly do you think you are?" Victoria demanded, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of evidence that nothing about this situation was as she had assumed. Marcus looked at Victoria with an expression that mixed pity with profound disappointment. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm exactly who my boarding pass says I am. The question is whether you're who you claim to be." The response was delivered with such calm certainty that it sent chills through everyone within earshot. Elena found her voice despite her shock over the rapid developments. "Mr. Thompson," she said hesitantly, do you work for the airline?" Marcus turned to Elena with a gentle smile that carried depths of meaning she couldn't yet fathom. In a manner of speaking, he said, "But more importantly, Elena, you work for an airline that values integrity and customer service. What happened to you today was wrong, and it's going to be corrected." David Mitchell's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the display and saw it was from corporate operations, never a good sign during what should have been routine boarding procedures. "David Mitchell." He answered, his voice tight with anxiety. "David, this is Sarah Mitchell from corporate operations. We've received reports of a passenger incident involving Victoria Ashford and a passenger named Marcus Thompson. Can you provide an immediate status report?" David's hands began to shake as he realized he was speaking directly to the chief operating officer, someone at least 4 levels above his position in the corporate hierarchy. "Yes, ma'am," David said, looking around the gate area with new understanding. "We have what appears to be a passenger discrimination situation. Miss Ashford refused to accept Mr. Thompson's legitimate first-class boarding pass and called security based on appearance rather than actual security concerns." "Is Mr. Thompson still at the gate?" Sarah Mitchell asked. "Yes, ma'am. He's been completely cooperative throughout the entire incident. I need you to personally ensure that Mr. Thompson is treated with full VIP protocols immediately. Miss Ashford is to have no further contact with passengers until we can conduct a full review." David felt the conversation's implications washing over him in waves. Corporate operations didn't make direct calls to gate supervisors unless something extraordinarily important was happening. "Yes, ma'am," David said. "Should I inform Miss Ashford of these instructions, Mr. Thompson will handle Miss Ashford's situation personally. Your job is to ensure passenger boarding proceeds smoothly and to document everything that has occurred." The line went dead, leaving David staring at his phone in bewilderment. Victoria had been watching David's conversation with growing alarm. His increasingly deferential tone and obvious shock suggested that whatever was happening was far more serious than a routine passenger complaint. Victoria said sharply, "What did corporate want?" David looked at Victoria with an expression that mixed professional obligation with personal sympathy. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I think you need to speak with Mr. Thompson privately before this goes any further." Marcus had been making a third phone call during David's conversation with corporate operations. This time, his voice carried the authority of someone coordinating multiple moving parts of a complex operation. "Legal," Marcus said into his phone. "I need immediate review of personnel actions taken at Gate B12 today, specifically the termination of Elena Vasquez by Victoria Ashford." Elena's breath caught as she realized Marcus was somehow involving the airline's legal department in her situation. "Yes, wrongful termination based on retaliation for protecting passenger rights," Marcus continued. "I'll need full reversal and appropriate compensation for the incident." Victoria listened to Marcus's call with mounting horror as she began to understand that his influence within the airline was far more extensive than any passenger should possess. Also, Marcus set initiate standard protocol for discrimination incident documentation. "We'll need complete records of everything that occurred, including all video evidence from passengers and security cameras." Officer Rodriguez had been observing Marcus's calls with the trained attention of someone experienced in reading people under stress. Nothing about Marcus's behavior suggested someone making empty threats or exaggerating his authority. The calm precision of his instructions suggested someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mr. Thompson," Officer Rodriguez said, approaching Marcus as he ended his call, "I need to ask you directly, what is your relationship to this airline?" Marcus looked at Officer Rodriguez with respect for his directness. "Officer, I appreciate you asking an honest question. My relationship to Celestial Airways is more complex than most passengers, but I want to be clear about something important." Marcus gestured toward the crowd of passengers who had been delayed by Victoria's actions. Every person here today paid for a service they expected to receive with dignity and respect. What happened to me could have happened to any of them. That's what makes this situation unacceptable. The response addressed Officer Rodriguez's question while making clear that Marcus's concern extended beyond personal grievance. Robert Hayes approached Marcus directly, his recognition finally crystallizing into certainty. "Mr. Thompson." Robert said, extending his hand. "I believe we've met before." Marcus shook Robert's hand with the familiarity of someone who remembered the connection. "Mr. Hayes," Marcus said, "I didn't realize you were traveling today." The exchange was brief, but its implications were enormous. Robert Hayes was a publicly known member of Celestial Airways' board of directors, and his obvious familiarity with Marcus suggested connections that reached the highest levels of corporate leadership. Victoria watched this interaction with dawning horror as the true scope of her mistake became impossible to deny. Elena moved closer to Marcus with questions that could no longer be contained. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, "who are you exactly?" Marcus looked at Elena with genuine warmth and respect for her courage throughout the incident. "Elena, I'm someone who believes that every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or dress. And I'm someone with the authority to ensure that principle is upheld." As if summoned by Marcus's words, Captain James Rodriguez appeared in the gate area, having left his aircraft to address what he had been told was an urgent operational matter. Captain Rodriguez approached Marcus, directly ignoring the crowd and cameras focused on their interaction. "Mr. Thompson, Captain Rodriguez said I received your directive. How would you like to proceed?" The question was asked with the deference typically reserved for senior executives or regulatory officials. Victoria Ashford watched the airline captain addressing Marcus with obvious respect and finally understood that everything she thought she knew about the situation was wrong. Captain James Rodriguez had flown for Celestial Airways for 20 years, rising through the ranks from regional routes to international flights through competence and unwavering professionalism. In all that time, he had never received an operational directive directly from a passenger until today. The call had come through official channels with proper authorization codes and executive override protocols that were impossible to fake. But standing in the gate area, looking at Marcus Thompson, Captain Rodriguez struggled to reconcile the young man in casual clothes with someone who possessed authority to ground flights and redirect aircraft. "Mr. Thompson," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the controlled professionalism that defined his approach to unexpected situations. "My crew is prepared to implement whatever protocols you deem necessary. How do you want to handle the passenger boarding situation?" The question was asked loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, and its implications rippled through the crowd like electrical current. Phones were raised higher, recording angles were adjusted, and Sarah Coleman's live stream audience surged past 10,000 viewers as word spread across social media platforms. Victoria Ashford stood frozen behind her counter, watching the airline captain address Marcus with unmistakable deference. Every assumption she had made about Marcus, his background, his authority, his legitimacy was crumbling in real time, but her capacity for acknowledging error had been overwhelmed by the magnitude of her mistake. Captain Rodriguez Marcus replied, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to making operational decisions. "I want to ensure that every passenger here today understands that discrimination has no place in our operations." The word "our" hung in the air with particular weight. Marcus wasn't speaking as a customer or a victim. He was speaking as someone with ownership stake in the airline's reputation and standards. Elena Vasquez felt her understanding of the situation shifting like tectonic plates. She had defended Marcus because it was the right thing to do, but she was beginning to realize that she had unknowingly protected someone whose authority within the airline exceeded anyone she had previously encountered. David Mitchell's phone buzzed again with another call from corporate operations. This time, the caller identification showed CEO office, which sent David's anxiety levels into territory he had never previously experienced. "David Mitchell," he answered, his voice tight with apprehension. "David, this is Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Celestial Airways. I need an immediate report on the passenger incident involving Marcus Thompson." David felt his knees weaken as he realized he was speaking directly to the chief executive officer of the entire airline. "Mr. Pierce David said, struggling to maintain professional composure while processing the impossibility of this moment. "We have a serious passenger discrimination incident involving Victoria Ashford and a passenger named Marcus Thompson." Miss Ashford refused to accept Mr. Thompson's legitimate documentation and called security based solely on his appearance. "Is Mr. Thompson injured or otherwise harmed?" the CEO asked, his tone suggesting personal concern rather than corporate damage control. "No, sir. Mr. Thompson has been extremely patient and professional throughout the entire incident." "David, I need you to understand something crucial," Jonathan Pierce continued. "Marcus Thompson is the founder and majority shareholder of Skyward Aviation Holdings, which owns Celestial Airways. Miss Ashford has discriminated against the person who ultimately signs everyone's paychecks, including mine." David felt the phone slip in his suddenly sweaty grip. The young man in the hoodie and sneakers was the ultimate owner of the airline, not just a VIP passenger, but literally the person at the top of the corporate hierarchy. Sir David said, his voice barely above a whisper, "What do you want me to do?" "Support Mr. Thompson completely and document everything for the investigation that will follow. And David, this conversation stays confidential until Mr. Thompson decides how he wants to handle the public aspects." The line went dead, leaving David staring at Marcus Thompson with a mixture of awe and terror as he realized he had witnessed a frontline employee discriminate against the company's owner. Victoria approached Captain Rodriguez with desperate authority, apparently unaware that David's conversation had been overheard by several passengers with sensitive hearing and powerful phone cameras. Captain Rodriguez Victoria said, her voice carrying the sharp tone of someone who believed her position still carried weight. "This passenger has been disruptive and threatening. I've documented multiple policy violations and he needs to be removed from the aircraft immediately." Captain Rodriguez looked at Victoria with an expression that mixed professional courtesy with barely contained disbelief. "Miss Ashford," Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "I've received direct operational instructions regarding Mr. Thompson from the highest levels of corporate leadership. Those instructions supersede any gate-level decisions." Victoria's face flushed red as she processed the implications of the captain's statement. "That's impossible," Victoria said, her voice rising loud enough to carry across the boarding area. "Corporate doesn't take direction from passengers, especially passengers who don't even look like they can afford coach tickets." The statement was delivered with such obvious racial prejudice that several passengers gasped audibly. Sarah Coleman's live stream exploded with comments calling for Victoria's immediate firing, while other recording passengers shared clips that began trending within minutes. Marcus looked at Victoria with profound sadness rather than anger. "Miss Ashford," Marcus said quietly, "you've just demonstrated exactly why this situation was necessary." Elena found herself moving toward Marcus with questions that could no longer be contained. "Mr. Thompson." Elena said, her voice shaking with the magnitude of what she was beginning to understand, "Are you really the owner of this airline?" Marcus turned to Elena with the gentle respect he had shown her throughout the incident. "Elena, I founded Skyward Holdings 12 years ago because I believed air travel should be accessible and dignified for everyone, regardless of their background or appearance. Today, you demonstrated those values under extraordinary pressure. That's exactly the kind of employee leadership this industry needs." The confirmation hit the boarding area like a physical blow. Passengers who had been documenting what appeared to be typical airline discrimination suddenly realized they were witnessing a corporate owner experiencing firsthand the failures in his own company's culture. Robert Hayes approached Marcus with the gravitas of someone who understood they were witnessing a watershed moment for the entire airline industry. Marcus Robert said, using the familiarity of board-level relationships, "How do you want to handle this situation publicly?" Marcus looked around the boarding area, taking in the cameras, the crowd, and the obvious attention this incident was receiving across social media platforms. Robert Marcus said, "I want this to be a teaching moment rather than a punishment spectacle. But I also want to ensure that what happened here today never happens to any other passenger." Victoria overheard the exchange between Marcus and Robert with mounting panic as she realized that her actions were being discussed at the highest levels of corporate leadership. "This is insane," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the boarding area. "You people are taking orders from a kid in a hoodie who probably bought his ticket with a stolen credit card." The statement was so disconnected from obvious reality that even passengers who weren't following the situation closely began recording Victoria's comments. Officer Rodriguez approached Victoria with the careful authority of someone who had dealt with individuals experiencing psychological breaks under pressure. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said, "I'm going to need you to step away from the passenger area while we sort this situation out." Victoria looked at Officer Rodriguez with incredulous fury. "I am the Senior Vice President of Passenger Experience for this airline," Victoria said, her voice rising to near-shouting levels. "You don't have authority to remove me from my own workplace." Captain Rodriguez intervened before the situation could escalate further. "Miss Ashford," Captain Rodriguez said firmly, "I have direct orders from CEO Jonathan Pierce regarding this incident. You are to have no further contact with passengers until corporate can conduct a full investigation." The mention of direct communication with the CEO sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Passengers who understood corporate hierarchies realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Marcus stepped forward before Victoria could respond to Captain Rodriguez. "Miss Ashford," Marcus said, his voice carrying absolute authority for the first time since the incident began, "your employment with Celestial Airways is terminated effective immediately." The words were delivered without emotion, not as revenge, but as an inevitable consequence of documented behavior that violated everything the airline claimed to represent. Victoria stared at Marcus with disbelief that bordered on psychological dissociation. "You can't fire me," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "You're nobody. You're just some kid who doesn't belong in first class." Elena stepped forward with courage that surprised everyone, including herself. "Miss Ashford," Elena said, her voice carrying new confidence, "Mr. Thompson just told you exactly who he is. You've been discriminating against the person who owns this entire airline." The statement hung in the air as phones captured every word and live streams carried the moment to audiences around the world. Marcus looked at Elena with genuine appreciation for her continued integrity under extraordinary circumstances. "Elena," Marcus said, "you're not just rehired, you're promoted to senior flight attendant, effective immediately. Today, you demonstrated the values that define excellence in customer service." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause as passengers witnessed justice being delivered in real time. Victoria Ashford looked around the boarding area with growing desperation as she realized that everything she had built her career on was collapsing around her. "This isn't possible," Victoria whispered more to herself than to anyone else. "This isn't how things work." Marcus approached Victoria with an expression that mixed authority with genuine regret. "Miss Ashford," Marcus said quietly, "this is exactly how things work when people are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance." "I'm sorry you never learned that lesson." As airport security prepared to escort Victoria from the gate area, passengers throughout the terminal were sharing videos and commentary that would reshape how the aviation industry approached customer service and discrimination. Captain Rodriguez addressed Marcus with the respect due to someone whose decisions affected thousands of employees and millions of passengers. "Mr. Thompson," Captain Rodriguez said, "how would you like to proceed with boarding?" Marcus looked at the assembled passengers, people who had been delayed and inconvenienced by discrimination they shouldn't have had to witness. Captain Marcus said, "Let's show these passengers what exceptional service looks like when it's delivered with integrity." And with those words, Marcus Thompson began demonstrating why true leadership is measured not by the respect you demand, but by the dignity you provide to others. The boarding of Flight 847 proceeded with an efficiency that bordered on the surreal. Word had spread through Celestial Airways' operational network that Marcus Thompson, the mysterious founder of Skyward Holdings, was on the aircraft, and every staff member was performing at levels typically reserved for regulatory inspections or celebrity passengers. Elena Vasquez moved through her new role as senior flight attendant with quiet confidence, her earlier termination and immediate promotion having transformed her understanding of both her capabilities and the company's values. She guided passengers to their seats with genuine warmth, her experience with discrimination creating a natural empathy for travelers who might feel unwelcome or misunderstood. Marcus had quietly taken his assigned seat in one, declining the ceremonial attention that several crew members attempted to provide. He opened a book and settled in for the flight with the same unassuming demeanor he had maintained throughout the gate incident. But his presence on the aircraft had created an undercurrent of heightened awareness among staff members who understood they were being evaluated by the person who ultimately determined their company's direction. Victoria Ashford had been escorted from the terminal by airport security, her 15-year career with Celestial Airways ending in the most public and humiliating manner possible. Videos of her removal were already circulating on social media platforms, accompanied by commentary from passengers who had witnessed her discrimination and subsequent meltdown. Captain Rodriguez completed his pre-flight checklist with particular attention to detail, knowing that this flight would likely be discussed in corporate boardrooms and industry publications. His crew had been briefed on the passenger incident, and everyone understood that their performance would reflect on the airline's commitment to the values Marcus Thompson had articulated. As Flight 847 taxied toward the runway, Sarah Coleman continued live streaming from her seat in the main cabin. Her audience had grown to over 20,000 viewers, making it one of the most watched real-time customer service incidents in aviation history. "We're finally taking off after the most incredible display of justice I've ever witnessed," Sarah told her phone. The passenger who was discriminated against turned out to be the owner of the airline, and he handled the situation with more grace and professionalism than I thought possible. The comments on Sarah's stream reflected a mix of vindication, amazement, and renewed faith in the possibility of accountability for discriminatory behavior. Captain Rodriguez received clearance for takeoff and began accelerating down the runway when his radio crackled with an urgent communication from Miami Tower. "Celestial 847 hold position. Do not proceed with departure." Captain Rodriguez immediately reduced power and began breaking procedures, his training taking over despite his confusion about the sudden departure hold. "Miami Tower Celestial 847 holding. Please advise nature of issue. Celestial 847 return to Gate B12 immediately. Priority operational directive from corporate operations." Captain Rodriguez felt his pulse increase as he processed the unprecedented nature of the instruction. In 20 years of flying, he had never been ordered to return to the gate after beginning takeoff procedures without a clear emergency or mechanical issue. Miami Tower confirming return to gate. Any additional information about the nature of the operational directive, negative Celestial 847. Contact corporate operations on arrival at gate. Captain Rodriguez turned the aircraft around and began the taxi back to the terminal, his mind racing through possible explanations for the mysterious recall. In the cabin, passengers who had been settling in for the 8-hour flight to London began experiencing varying levels of anxiety and speculation about the sudden change in plans. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced calm, explaining that they were returning to the gate to address an operational matter and that more information would be provided shortly. Marcus Thompson remained reading his book, showing no signs of surprise or concern about the aircraft's return to the gate. If anything, he seemed to relax slightly, as if the development was expected rather than alarming. Elena approached Marcus's seat with professional concern for a passenger who had already experienced significant stress during the boarding process. "Mr. Thompson," Elena said quietly, "I wanted to personally assure you that this return to the gate is not related to the earlier incident." Captain Rodriguez received operational instructions that supersede normal flight procedures. Marcus looked up from his book with a gentle smile that suggested appreciation for Elena's consideration. "Elena, Marcus said I appreciate your professionalism, but I suspect this return to the gate is very much related to the earlier incident." Elena felt a chill of uncertainty as she processed Marcus's words and their implications. Sir Elena said hesitantly, "Do you know why we're returning to the gate?" Marcus closed his book and looked at Elena with the expression of someone who was about to share information that would change everything she thought she understood. Elena Marcus said quietly, "Victoria Ashford's discrimination against me was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of behavior that reflects widespread problems in airline culture. This flight was recalled because corporate operations has just learned about additional issues that require immediate investigation." Elena felt her understanding of the situation expanding in ways she hadn't anticipated. "What kind of additional issues?" Elena asked. Marcus gestured toward the other passengers, many of whom were now recording their conversation with obvious interest. "Elena, over the past 18 months I've been flying incognito on various airlines to assess customer service standards firsthand. What happened at the gate today was the third time this year that Celestial Airways staff have discriminated against passengers based on appearance rather than behavior." The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just been a victim of discrimination. He had been conducting deliberate research into his own company's failures. The other incidents, Elena asked. "Documented, recorded, and filed with legal teams," Marcus said. Today's incident was simply the most public and egregious example of a cultural problem that extends throughout the organization. As Flight 847 approached the gate, Captain Rodriguez received another radio communication that would reshape his understanding of his role within the airline. "Captain Rodriguez, this is CEO Jonathan Pierce. I need to speak with you personally upon arrival at the gate." Captain Rodriguez felt his anxiety spike as he realized the chief executive officer was becoming personally involved in whatever was happening. "Mr. Pierce?" Captain Rodriguez said understood. "Should I inform passengers about the nature of our return to gate negative, Captain?" "Mr. Thompson will address passenger concerns directly." The mention of Marcus Thompson providing passenger briefings confirmed Captain Rodriguez's growing understanding that this situation involved corporate authority at the highest levels. As the aircraft reached the gate, Marcus Thompson stood and moved to the front of the cabin with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to addressing groups under pressure. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly throughout the aircraft, "I apologize for the disruption to your travel plans. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm the founder and majority shareholder of Skyward Holdings, which owns Celestial Airways." The announcement created immediate silence throughout the cabin as passengers processed the implications of what they were hearing. What you witnessed at the gate today was unacceptable discrimination that violated everything this airline claims to represent. We returned to the gate because I've learned that similar incidents have occurred with other passengers, and those situations require immediate investigation and correction. Sarah Coleman's live stream exploded with activity as viewers realized they were witnessing a corporate owner taking personal responsibility for organizational failures in real time. "I want to be clear about something important," Marcus continued. "The discrimination you witnessed today could have happened to any of you. It was wrong, it violated company policy, and it will never be tolerated again." Marcus paused, looking around the cabin at faces that reflected a mixture of surprise, respect, and appreciation for his direct communication. "For those passengers who want to continue to London, we will provide a replacement aircraft with a crew trained in the dignity and respect standards this airline should have maintained from the beginning. For those who prefer alternative arrangements, we will provide full refunds and additional compensation for the inconvenience." The offer was so comprehensive and personally delivered that several passengers began applauding spontaneously. Elena approached Marcus with questions that could no longer be contained. "Mr. Thompson," Elena said quietly, "what happens to the rest of us who work for the airline?" Marcus looked at Elena with the respect he had shown her throughout their entire interaction. "Elena, employees like you who demonstrated integrity under pressure will lead the transformation of this company's culture. Employees who participated in or enabled discrimination will find different career paths. As the aircraft door opened and ground personnel prepared to address the passengers, Marcus Thompson prepared to demonstrate why true leadership requires the courage to acknowledge failures and the commitment to ensure they never happen again. Marcus Thompson descended the aircraft stairs with the measured pace of someone who understood that the next few hours would define not just his airline's reputation, but potentially reshape industry standards across aviation. Behind him, passengers and crew members processed the implications of learning that they had witnessed a corporate owner experiencing discrimination within his own company. The scene at Gate B12 had transformed dramatically since Flight 847's departure 40 minutes earlier. Airport security had cordoned off the area. Corporate executives in tailored suits clustered around makeshift command stations, and media representatives, alerted by viral social media coverage, positioned cameras and microphones to capture whatever was about to unfold. Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Celestial Airways, waited at the gate with the expression of someone facing the most challenging crisis of his career. At 55, Pierce had navigated airline industry consolidations, economic downturns, and regulatory challenges, but nothing had prepared him for explaining to his company's founder how discrimination had occurred under his leadership. Marcus Pierce said, extending his hand with the careful deference of someone whose job security depended entirely on the person he was greeting, "I cannot adequately express my regret about today's incident." Marcus shook Pierce's hand with the same calm professionalism he had maintained throughout the crisis. Jonathan Marcus said, "Regret is appropriate, but what I need now is accountability and widespread change." The word widespread carried particular weight coming from someone whose financial investment in the airline measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Elena Vasquez emerged from the aircraft, still processing her rapid transformation from terminated employee to promoted supervisor to witness of corporate accountability at the highest levels. She approached Marcus and Pierce with the tentative confidence of someone trying to understand her role in unfolding events. "Mr. Thompson," Elena said, "how can I help ensure this never happens to other passengers?" Marcus turned to Elena with genuine appreciation for her continued focus on customer service rather than personal advancement. Elena Marcus said, "You're going to help design new training programs that ensure every employee understands that dignity and respect are not negotiable values." Pierce nodded emphatically, recognizing an opportunity to demonstrate alignment with Marcus's priorities. "We'll implement comprehensive sensitivity training across all departments," Pierce said, with Elena leading the development process. Marcus looked at Pierce with the measured attention of someone evaluating promises against performance. "Jonathan, training programs are necessary but insufficient. I need structural changes that make discrimination impossible, rather than merely discouraged." Captain Rodriguez approached the group with the respectful demeanor of someone seeking guidance from ultimate authority. "Mr. Thompson," Captain Rodriguez said, "my crew is prepared to implement whatever protocols you deem necessary for passenger service excellence." Marcus looked at Captain Rodriguez with appreciation for his professionalism throughout the crisis. "Captain Rodriguez, your handling of today's situation demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership this airline needs. I'd like you to consider a role in operational oversight that extends beyond flight operations." The offer was delivered casually, but its implications were enormous. Captain Rodriguez was being considered for executive advancement based on his integrity during crisis. Sarah Coleman continued documenting events from her position near the gate, her live stream now being watched by over 50,000 viewers as news outlets began covering the story. "This is absolutely unprecedented," Sarah told her phone. "We're watching a corporate owner take personal responsibility for discrimination in his company and implement changes in real time." What Sarah couldn't see from her position were the rapid-fire phone conversations taking place between Celestial Airways executives and legal teams as they processed the implications of documented discrimination against the company's founder. Robert Hayes approached Marcus with the serious expression of someone who understood that board-level decisions were being made in a public forum. Marcus Robert said, "The board is prepared to support whatever changes you deem necessary to address cultural issues throughout the organization." Marcus looked at Robert with the strategic thinking that had built Skyward Holdings into a major aviation company. Robert, I appreciate the board's support, but this isn't about implementing policies from the top down. This is about creating culture that ensures respect happens naturally at every level. David Mitchell had been observing the corporate discussions while managing passenger logistics and gate operations. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from various department heads seeking information about the unfolding situation. Mr. Thompson David said, approaching the group with careful professionalism, "I've documented everything that occurred today, including recordings from security cameras and passenger phones. Would you like me to prepare a comprehensive report?" Marcus looked at David with respect for his thorough approach to crisis documentation. "David, your attention to detail during today's incident probably saved several careers, including your own. I'd like you to consider a role in quality assurance that extends beyond gate operations." The offer recognized David's integrity while providing advancement opportunities based on demonstrated performance under pressure. Elena found herself positioned at the center of discussions about airline industry transformation, a responsibility that felt overwhelming but important. Mr. Thompson Elena said, "What happens to employees who might have made similar mistakes to Victoria's? Do we terminate everyone who's ever shown bias, or do we create opportunities for people to learn and improve?" The question demonstrated Elena's understanding that organizational change required nuance rather than simply punitive measures. Marcus considered Elena's question with the thoughtfulness of someone who understood that sustainable change required balancing accountability with redemption. Elena Marcus said people who demonstrate willingness to acknowledge mistakes and commit to improvement deserve opportunities to grow. People who refuse to recognize their bias or continue discriminatory behavior after training do not. Pierce nodded vigorously, recognizing wisdom in Marcus's approach. "We'll create assessment programs that distinguish between employees who made mistakes and employees who represent cultural problems," Pierce said. Marcus looked at Pierce with evaluation rather than agreement. "Jonathan, we'll create assessment programs after we understand the full scope of discrimination issues within the company. Today's incident wasn't isolated, and we need comprehensive understanding before implementing solutions." The statement carried implicit criticism of Pierce's leadership while providing direction for organizational investigation. Officer Rodriguez, who had remained at the gate throughout the aircraft's departure and return, approached Marcus with professional curiosity about the broader implications of what he had witnessed. "Mr. Thompson, Officer Rodriguez said, I've been working airport security for 12 years, and I've never seen a passenger discrimination incident handled like this. Are you planning changes that extend beyond Celestial Airways?" Marcus looked at Officer Rodriguez with appreciation for his perspective on passenger treatment across multiple airlines. Officer Rodriguez, discrimination in aviation is an industry-wide problem that requires industry-wide solutions. What happened here today will hopefully encourage other airlines to examine their own cultures. The response suggested that Marcus's influence and intentions extended beyond correcting problems within his own company. As corporate executives continued coordinating response strategies, passengers from Flight 847 began sharing their experiences on social media platforms, creating a real-time narrative about a corporate accountability that was reshaping public expectations for customer service. Elena approached Marcus with questions about her expanding role in organizational transformation. "Meister, Thompson." Elena said, "How do we ensure that changes we implement today don't get diluted or forgotten as time passes?" Marcus looked at Elena with recognition of her understanding that sustainable change required ongoing attention rather than momentary fixes. Elena Marcus said, "We create accountability structures that make discrimination personally costly for anyone who chooses to engage in it, and we reward integrity consistently enough that people understand our values are genuine." As Marcus Thompson prepared to address the assembled media and corporate representatives, it became clear that the events at Gate B12 would be remembered as a watershed moment in aviation industry customer service standards. The press conference area that had spontaneously formed at Gate B12 buzzed with an energy that Marcus Thompson recognized from other watershed moments in corporate accountability. Reporters who had initially rushed to cover what appeared to be a routine passenger discrimination story were beginning to understand they were documenting something far more significant, a real-time demonstration of leadership accountability that was unprecedented in the airline industry. Marcus stood before the assembled cameras and microphones with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the day's events. Behind him, Celestial Airways executives flanked him like a corporate honor guard, their expressions reflecting varying degrees of anxiety about how Marcus would choose to frame the day's events. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the terminal area, "my name is Marcus Thompson. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Skyward Holdings, which owns Celestial Airways and several other aviation companies." The formal introduction created immediate silence among the gathered reporters, many of whom were recognizing that they were about to receive unprecedented access to a major corporate owner's perspective on discrimination within his own company. This morning, I approached the first-class check-in counter at this gate wearing casual clothes and carrying legitimate travel documents. I was denied boarding, accused of fraud, threatened with arrest, and subjected to security screening based entirely on my appearance. Marcus paused, allowing the gravity of his statement to register with the audience. The employee who discriminated against me, Victoria Ashford, held a senior position within the company and has spent years representing Celestial Airways at industry conferences as an expert on customer service excellence. Sarah Coleman positioned her phone to capture both Marcus's statement and the reactions of corporate executives, her live stream audience now exceeding 100,000 viewers as major news outlets began sharing her coverage. "What happened to me today was wrong, but it was not unique," Marcus continued. "Over the past 18 months, I have been conducting undercover assessments of customer service across our airlines. Today's incident was the third documented case of discrimination I have personally experienced as a passenger within my own company. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Reporters began furiously taking notes as they realized Marcus had been deliberately exposing himself to discrimination to assess organizational culture. Elena Vasquez watched Marcus's statement with a growing understanding of how today's events fit into a larger pattern of corporate investigation. She had defended Marcus because it was morally correct, but she was learning that her integrity had intersected with a sophisticated evaluation of company values. "I want to address several groups directly," Marcus said, his tone shifting to carry the authority of someone making decisions that would affect thousands of employees. "To passengers who have experienced discrimination within our airline or others, your experiences matter. Your dignity deserves protection, and your complaints will be investigated thoroughly." Spontaneous applause broke out among passengers and bystanders, many of whom had their own stories of airline mistreatment. "To employees who participated in or enabled discriminatory treatment, your behavior violated company policy and basic human decency. Your employment with this organization will be terminated." The statement was delivered without emotion, but with finality that made clear these were not negotiable decisions. "To employees like Elena Vasquez, who demonstrated integrity under pressure and defended passenger rights despite personal risk, you represent the values this company should have maintained consistently. You will lead our transformation efforts." Elena felt tears forming as she processed Marcus's recognition of her courage and the opportunities it was creating. To industry colleagues who may be watching this coverage, discrimination in aviation is widespread, documented, and unacceptable. What happened here today should prompt examination of customer service cultures across all airlines. Marcus looked directly into the cameras with the intensity of someone delivering a message intended for audiences far beyond the immediate press conference. Captain Rodriguez approached the microphone area with the respectful bearing of someone seeking permission to add perspective to Marcus's statement. "Mr. Thompson," Captain Rodriguez said as the captain of today's flight, "I want to state publicly that your handling of this situation demonstrated more leadership and professionalism than I have witnessed in 20 years of aviation." The endorsement from a veteran pilot carried particular weight with industry observers who understood that flight crews were typically cautious about public statements regarding corporate leadership. Pierce stepped forward with the careful demeanor of someone trying to demonstrate alignment with Marcus's values while acknowledging failures under his leadership. Mr. Thompson Pierce said, "I take personal responsibility for organizational failures that allowed discrimination to occur within our company. I am committed to implementing whatever changes you deem necessary to ensure this never happens again." Marcus looked at Pierce with the evaluative attention of someone determining whether promises aligned with demonstrated commitment. Jonathan Marcus said accountability requires more than promises. It requires structural changes that make discrimination impossible rather than simply discouraged. The distinction between policies and culture resonated with reporters who had covered other corporate discrimination scandals. David Mitchell approached Marcus with documentation he had compiled throughout the day's events. Mr. Thompson David said, "I have security camera footage, passenger recordings, and witness statements that provide complete documentation of today's incident. This evidence is available for any investigations or legal proceedings you deem appropriate." Marcus accepted the documentation with appreciation for David's thoroughness. "David, your attention to detail and commitment to accurate reporting probably prevented this situation from becoming even more damaging to innocent employees." "Thank you." Officer Rodriguez stepped forward to provide law enforcement perspective on the day's events. "Mr. Thompson Officer Rodriguez said, "I've handled hundreds of passenger disputes, and I've never seen someone maintain composure and professionalism under discriminatory treatment the way you did today. Your response should be a model for conflict resolution and customer service." The endorsement from security personnel provided external validation of Marcus's approach to crisis management. As Marcus prepared to conclude his statement, Elena approached the microphone area with the confidence of someone who had found her voice during extraordinary circumstances. "Mr. Thompson." Elena said, "I want to thank you for creating an environment where doing the right thing leads to recognition rather than punishment. Today showed me what leadership looks like." Marcus looked at Elena with genuine warmth and respect. Elena Marcus said, "Today showed everyone what integrity looks like. Your willingness to defend passenger rights despite personal risk demonstrates the values that will define this company's future." Sarah Coleman concluded her live stream with commentary that captured the significance of what her audience had witnessed. "We've just watched something unprecedented in corporate accountability," Sarah told her phone. A company owner experienced discrimination within his own organization and used that experience to implement immediate, meaningful change. This is what justice looks like. As the impromptu press conference concluded, Marcus Thompson had demonstrated that true leadership means taking personal responsibility for organizational failures and implementing changes that ensure dignity and respect become operational realities rather than aspirational statements. The ripple effects of the day's events were already spreading across the aviation industry as other airlines began examining their own customer service cultures, understanding that discriminatory practices would no longer be tolerated by passengers or ignored by corporate leadership. The transformation of Celestial Airways began immediately, with changes implemented so swiftly that they seemed to cascade through the organization like water through a dam break. Marcus Thompson's public statements had created accountability expectations that required immediate action rather than gradual policy adjustments. Within 2 hours of the press conference, Victoria Ashford's employment termination was officially processed, along with formal separation agreements that included non-disclosure provisions and forfeiture of all pension benefits. Her industry reputation, built over 15 years of customer service presentations, was effectively destroyed by documented video evidence of discrimination that no amount of legal maneuvering could rehabilitate. Elena Vasquez found herself promoted not just to senior flight attendant, but to newly created Director of Passenger Experience Training, a position that came with authority to review and modify customer service protocols across all Celestial Airways operations. Her first mandate was developing assessment criteria that distinguished between employees who could be retrained and those who represented irredeemable cultural problems, Elena Marcus said as they reviewed organizational charts in the corporate office area adjacent to Gate B12. I need you to understand something important about your new role. You're not just implementing training programs, you're rebuilding the foundation of how this company treats people. Elena nodded, still processing the magnitude of responsibility that had resulted from her decision to defend passenger rights despite personal risk. Mr. Thompson. Elena said, how do we ensure changes we implement today don't get undermined by managers who might resist new policies? Marcus looked at Elena with appreciation for her understanding that sustainable organizational change required more than executive directives. Elena, we identify employees whose commitment to dignity and respect is genuine versus those who will comply only under observation. The latter group will find other career opportunities. Captain Rodriguez received notification of his promotion to Director of Operational Excellence, a newly created position that combined flight operations oversight with customer service accountability. His handling of the aircraft recall and subsequent passenger communication had demonstrated leadership capabilities that extended beyond technical aviation skills. Captain Rodriguez Marcus said, I need someone in operations who understands that passenger dignity is as important as flight safety. Your decisions today showed me you possess both kinds of judgment. Captain Rodriguez accepted the promotion with gratitude and clear understanding of the cultural transformation he was being asked to lead. Mr. Thompson, Captain Rodriguez said, how do we change attitudes among employees who might view new sensitivity requirements as political correctness rather than professional necessity? Marcus considered the question with the strategic thinking that had built Skyward Holdings into a successful aviation company. Captain, we make respect a performance metric that affects compensation advancement and job security. People who treat others with dignity because it's required will eventually treat others with dignity because it's effective. David Mitchell's documentation of the day's events led to his promotion to Manager of a Customer Service Accountability, with authority to investigate passenger complaints and implement corrective action without requiring approval from senior management. His thorough approach to crisis documentation had impressed Marcus as evidence of both integrity and competence under pressure. David Marcus said, I need someone in customer service who understands that our reputation depends on how we treat passengers when we think nobody is watching. David accepted his new responsibilities with clear understanding that his role involved protecting passenger rights rather than simply managing passenger complaints. Pierce found himself charged with implementing enterprise-wide policy changes that would be monitored directly by Marcus rather than filtered through traditional corporate hierarchy. His job security now depended on demonstrating measurable improvement in customer service metrics and documented reduction in discrimination incidents. Jonathan Marcus said, you have 90 days to show me evidence that organizational culture is changing at every level. This includes terminating employees who resist new standards and promoting employees who embrace them. Pierce nodded with the chastened understanding of someone whose career depended entirely on successful implementation of values-based leadership. Officer Rodriguez received a formal letter of appreciation from Celestial Airways recognizing his professional handling of a sensitive passenger incident. More significantly, he was offered a position as aviation security consultant, helping the airline develop protocols that distinguished between legitimate security concerns and discriminatory profiling. Officer Rodriguez Marcus said, your ability to recognize the difference between actual security issues and bias-based suspicion is exactly what this industry needs. Officer Rodriguez accepted the consulting role with enthusiasm for contributing to improved passenger treatment across the aviation industry. The immediate impact of Marcus's accountability measures extended beyond individual personnel changes. Corporate communications teams began drafting policy statements that would apply to all Skyward Holdings properties, establishing uniform standards for passenger treatment that exceeded federal anti-discrimination requirements. Legal teams initiated comprehensive reviews of complaint handling procedures, identifying patterns of discrimination that had been previously ignored or actively suppressed. The investigation revealed that Victoria's behavior toward Marcus was part of a documented pattern of bias against passengers who didn't conform to her expectations for premium cabin customers. Human resources departments across all Skyward properties received directives to implement immediate sensitivity training with clear consequences for employees who demonstrated bias during assessment periods. The training programs would be developed by Elena and her team based on real-world scenarios that highlighted the difference between legitimate customer service concerns and discriminatory profiling. Public relations teams coordinated with news outlets to ensure accurate coverage of the day's events, emphasizing Marcus's commitment to transparency and accountability rather than attempting to minimize the significance of documented discrimination. The strategy recognized that authentic change required acknowledging problems rather than managing perceptions. Passenger advocacy groups began receiving calls from Celestial Airways representatives seeking input on policy changes that would address bias in customer service. The outreach represented unprecedented airline industry engagement with civil rights organizations on customer treatment issues. Social media monitoring revealed overwhelmingly positive public response to Marcus's handling of the discrimination incident. Passengers who had experienced similar treatment began sharing their stories with hashtags that amplified awareness of aviation industry bias while praising Marcus's accountability measures. Industry publications began analyzing the day's events as a potential watershed moment in airline customer service standards. Editorial coverage focused on Marcus's unusual approach of personally experiencing discrimination within his own company, rather than relying on reports from subordinates. Competitor airlines initiated emergency meetings to review their own customer service cultures, understanding that passenger expectations for dignified treatment had been elevated by Marcus's public demonstration of accountability. Several airlines announced immediate policy reviews and enhanced training programs within 24 hours of the Celestial Airways incident. As the immediate consequences of the day's events continued cascading through the organization and industry, it became clear that Marcus Thompson had achieved more than justice for a single incident. He had created a new standard for corporate accountability that would influence aviation industry culture for years to come. 6 months after the incident at Gate B-12, Marcus Thompson sat in Seat 12C on a Delta Airlines flight from Atlanta to Denver, wearing jeans and a university sweatshirt observing. He had spent the intervening months implementing the structural changes promised during his press conference, but more importantly, he had continued his practice of flying incognito to assess whether industry-wide cultural shifts were taking root. The young flight attendant approaching his row was Hispanic professional and showed no signs of treating any passenger differently based on appearance. She offered beverages with genuine warmth, addressed each passenger respectfully, and demonstrated the kind of universal courtesy that had become standard across most major airlines since the Celestial Airways incident. Marcus's phone contained dozens of messages from Elena Vasquez, who had transformed passenger experience training across all Skyward Holdings properties with remarkable success. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements, passenger complaints had dropped by 80%, and Elena's training programs were being licensed by other airlines seeking to implement similar cultural changes. Captain Rodriguez had successfully transitioned to his role as Director of Operational Excellence, overseeing not just flight operations, but crew training programs that emphasized passenger dignity as a core safety issue. His leadership had resulted in industry recognition for Celestial Airways as setting new standards in customer service accountability. David Mitchell's Customer Service Accountability Program had investigated over 200 passenger complaints in 6 months, resulting in termination of 37 employees who demonstrated persistent bias and promotion of dozens of employees who showed commitment to respectful passenger treatment. His thoroughness had created industry-wide adoption of similar oversight programs. Peers had successfully implemented enterprise-wide policy changes that made discrimination grounds for immediate termination without progressive discipline. More importantly, he had created advancement opportunities that rewarded employees for demonstrating exceptional commitment to passenger dignity, fundamentally altering the organization's incentive structure. But perhaps the most significant change was less visible: the transformation of expectations among passengers themselves. Social media had amplified awareness that discriminatory treatment was not only wrong, but potentially career-ending for airline employees. Passengers felt empowered to document inappropriate behavior and confident that complaints would be investigated seriously. Marcus received a text message from Elena as his flight descended into Denver. "Mr. Thompson, today, a gate agent at Phoenix Sky Harbor told me our training program helped her recognize and stop her own bias against passengers with disabilities. She said learning about dignity changed how she sees her job. Thank you for creating space for people to grow." The message captured exactly what Marcus had hoped to achieve: not just punishment for discrimination, but genuine transformation of how people understood their responsibilities to each other. As Marcus deplaned in Denver, he was approached by a young black man who recognized him from media coverage of the Celestial Airways incident. "Mr. Thompson," the passenger said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. I fly constantly for work, and I used to dress up for flights because I was afraid of being treated poorly. Since your story came out, I've been flying in comfort clothes and haven't had a single problem. You changed how airlines see people like us." Marcus shook the young man's hand with genuine appreciation for his courage in sharing personal experience. Sir Marcus replied, "You changed things by refusing to accept discriminatory treatment as normal. I just provided a platform for accountability that already should have existed." The interaction reminded Marcus that sustainable change required courage from everyone affected by discrimination, not just those with corporate authority to implement policy changes. Walking through Denver International Airport, Marcus noticed changes that extended beyond formal policies. Airline staff made eye contact with all passengers. Gate agents addressed travelers with consistent courtesy regardless of appearance, and the general atmosphere felt more welcoming than he had experienced in years of aviation travel. His phone buzzed with a call from Robert Hayes, who remained on the Celestial Airways board and had become Marcus's primary contact for industry-wide reform initiatives. "Marcus, Robert said I wanted to give you an update on the ripple effects from your public accountability demonstration. The Aviation Customer Service Coalition has adopted your dignity standards as industry best practices. More than 40 airlines have implemented similar training programs, and passenger satisfaction scores are reaching historical highs." Marcus appreciated the widespread impact of the changes, but his focus remained on individual experiences rather than industry statistics. Robert Marcus said statistics matter, but what matters more is whether a tired business traveler or a nervous first-time flyer feels welcome when they approach an airline counter. That's where real change happens. The conversation ended with both men understanding that the transformation initiated by Marcus's courage to experience discrimination had created permanent shifts in aviation industry culture. As Marcus collected his luggage at baggage claim, he reflected on the personal cost of the changes he had implemented. His decision to fly incognito had exposed him to painful discrimination, but it had also provided insights into organizational failures that no amount of reports or meetings could have revealed. More importantly, his public response to discrimination had created opportunities for employees like Elena Captain Rodriguez and David Mitchell to demonstrate leadership capabilities that might never have been recognized under traditional corporate structures. The young security officer checking identification at the airport exit was efficient, courteous, and showed no signs of profiling passengers based on appearance, another small indicator that cultural change was becoming embedded in operational practices across the travel industry. Marcus's final text of the day went to Elena, 6 months ago. "You risked your job to defend passenger dignity. Today, millions of travelers benefit from the courage you showed. Thank you for believing that doing the right thing matters more than protecting your position." Elena's response came immediately. "Mr. Thompson, 6 months ago, you showed me what leadership looks like when it's measured by how you treat people rather than how they treat you. Thank you for teaching me that power used for justice creates more power for justice." As Marcus Thompson walked into the Denver evening, he carried the satisfaction of someone who had transformed personal pain into institutional change, creating a legacy measured not by corporate profits, but by human dignity. The young man, who had been discriminated against at Gate B12, had used that experience to ensure that future passengers would travel with dignity regardless of how they looked where they came from, or whether anyone was watching. 2 years after the incident that reshaped aviation industry customer service, Marcus Thompson still flies economy, sometimes still dresses comfortably, still observes. The discrimination that once seemed routine has largely disappeared, replaced by a culture of dignity that extends far beyond airline policies to fundamental shifts in how service industry employees understand their responsibilities. Elena Vasquez now directs passenger experience training for the International Air Transport Association, teaching Marcus's dignity-based customer service model to airlines worldwide. Victoria Ashford works at a small customer service center in suburban New Jersey, where she has slowly learned the respect for others that she spent 15 years forgetting. Her transformation came too late to save her aviation career, but not too late to save her humanity. The Gate B12 standard has become shorthand throughout the service industry for accountability that creates lasting change rather than temporary compliance. Marcus Thompson's willingness to experience discrimination in order to eliminate it proved that true leadership sometimes requires accepting personal pain to create broader justice, and that the most powerful response to bias is not anger, but the unwavering commitment to ensure it never happens again. If this story moved you, if you believe in dignity and respect for everyone, regardless of how they look or dress, please hit that like button right now. Your support helps us share more stories about courage and justice. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss these powerful true stories. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because when we stand together against discrimination, we create a world where everyone can travel with dignity. What's your story? Drop a comment below and let us know about a time you stood up for what's right. Thank you for watching, and remember, real change starts when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things.